Move on to the next question, and they're in the names of Deputy Micheál Martin and Joan Burton. Taoiseach, questions 3 and 4, I understand they're grouped.
Yes, 3 and 4 together. The leaking of some information from the Scally report before the women and families most affected could be briefed was wrong. The report concerned a very sensitive issue, touching on the lives of women, some of whom are very ill, and of course of families, some of whom are grieving after a devastating bereavement. The leaking of this information was not done with any regard to the interests of the families and the women concerned, and frustrated the plans that had been put in place to have Dr Scally brief the women and families and patient representatives at the same time as the Cabinet meeting and ahead of the publication of the report. The matter is being investigated by a senior official who did not receive a copy of the report in advance of its publication, and I don't wish to preempt the investigation by attempting at this stage to answer questions which will have to be considered as part of that inquiry.
I think when someone in government decided to leak and spin the Scally report, you said at the time that you were disgusted by it and condemned in very clear terms what had happened. Now the question remains whether you were sincere in this or whether you're actually just scared to find the culprit, because the culprit could be very much part of a near permanent obsession with spin in your government. And I think we should be clear on this. I think you know, or it should be easy for you to determine every single person in government who had any access to the report's findings. It seems that it was basically in your office and in the office of the Minister for Health. The leaking of the report, I think, was morally repugnant, without question, given the significance of the issue involved, and as you have said, it frustrated the objective of meeting with the women in the first instance who have been affected by this, and briefing them on the content of the report itself. It was also a clear breach of the confidentiality of Cabinet documents and the confidentiality of official papers. Did you consider, Taoiseach, would it not have been preferable to bring in an outside person with the power and authority to get to the bottom of what was a callous and a very cynical attempt at media manipulation? No question about that. That was the objective, was to manipulate the public discourse in relation to the Scally report in advance of its publication. That's not new. That has happened on quite a number of reports where, in order for government to get its line out first, leaks occur. So can you indicate to me when the senior official that you've appointed will report to you? Because it's about 6 weeks now, and surely the person has some timeline as to when we can expect a report on this investigation. And why did you give any consideration to asking someone outside to do the investigation?
Deputy Louise O'Reilly.
Taoiseach, what was at the centre of the scandal known as the cervical check scandal was the withholding of information, and what happened in the immediate aftermath was that information was selectively leaked into the public domain, drip-fed into the public domain. We had the Minister for Health in here complaining about the manner in which some of this information was being drip-fed into the public domain. In the immediate aftermath of this latest leak, the people involved came out to say that they were incredibly hurt. They had put a lot of faith in the Scally report. They had put a lot. They'd put a lot of themselves into that report, into getting to the truth. So I suppose my questions are: can you give us an update as to exactly what stage the investigation is at? My understanding is there were a very limited number of people who had access to the information that somehow found its way into the public domain. It strikes me as a little bit odd that a senior person, given whatever assistance it is that you have provided, cannot identify the person. It's not a case that there were multiple copies of this left lying around. I can't understand the reason for the delay. Have you identified the person who has leaked the report? And if you have, and when that person is identified, will it be the case that that person will be subject to disciplinary action? And can you advise if Minister Harris was aware of the leak in advance?
Taoiseach.
I think at the outset it's important, last Can Corla, to say that the report itself was not leaked. The document wasn't leaked. none of the recommendations appeared in the press, nor did any of the findings. What appeared in the press in advance of the report was one aspect of it, and that aspect was that it was Dr. Scalia's opinion that a commission of inquiry was not warranted. So none of the recommendations were leaked, none of the findings were leaked. What was leaked was this aspect, his opinion that a commission investigation was not warranted. So perhaps you could say one line from the entire report was leaked to the press in advance. I note Deputy Martin's allegations. He regularly makes allegations in this House without any evidence to back them up, and certainly has a penchant for innuendo and conspiracy theories. The report, of course, would have been available to more than the Department of Health and the Office of the Taoiseach. It would have been available to Dr. Scally, to his own team, and to many of the advisors who assisted him in putting together the report as well. So the presumption that Deputy Martin is making, that only somebody in government or a civil servant or a politician had access to this report, is of course not the case. And of course it could have been leaked by somebody who didn't have the report at all, because all that was leaked was one aspect of it, the fact that it was Dr. Scalia's opinion that a commission of inquiry was not investigated. So it could have been done on a verbal basis, and as is always the case, unless there's a paper trail or a documentary trail of some nature, it's very difficult to identify who the culprit is. Certainly if the person is identified, they will be disciplined if they are a civil servant or a politician or advisor. If they're not, obviously that doesn't fall to me. And the only people who know, of course, are the journalists involved, who have been asked for their cooperation, that this shouldn't be treated as a normal story. And those journalists who do know have been asked to cooperate out of respect to the women and the families who were upset by this. And of course, the only other person who knows is the person who leaked the information.
A supplementary to Deputy Martin, we have time.
You can't sort of just try and reduce the significance of this by saying it's just one item from the report. It was a very key issue, because the Minister, of course, in the Dáil, in this chamber, had agreed to a commission of inquiry. He came under pressure here on the floor of the House, and for whatever reason he capitulated on the evening and said, yes, we're going to have a commission of inquiry. And you followed suit by saying there would be a commission of inquiry. So it was very significant that prior to the publication of the report, a steer happens, a spin happens. The spin being there's no need for a commission of inquiry. And the cynical or the sceptical might say, well, those in authority, the various stakeholders, the last thing they want now is a commission of inquiry into this. And therefore, let's spin it in that direction via the Scally report. That's one particular possibility here. It's a very significant element that was leaked. And I think it was done with a specific reason. And it was done with a specific reason to undermine the case for a commission of inquiry. Whether one agrees or disagrees, that was the objective of the leak, to move away from the idea that there should be a commission of inquiry into the cervical check issue. And I speak as someone who initially had supported the government in terms of the HEQA-led inquiry. But on the floor of the House, the Minister, under pressure from the floor, caved in and said, we'll have a commission of inquiry. And ever since Scalia's report has reported, the whole emphasis has been moving away from the commission of inquiry. That's the context. Could you indicate the name of the senior official who's investigating this? Could you please give us his details and his rank and what department the official is from? And thirdly, may I make the point that you know and I know that media protects its sources. It's a bit much to suggest now that, given the propensity of government ministers to leak to various senior political correspondents and people across the board on a regular basis, that you now want them to, that you're allegedly sincere in your attempt to want them to cough up the source. I think that's breathtakingly cynical.
You should respond, then we move on.
I really would encourage Deputy Martin. He's quite a history in the last couple of years of engaging in innuendo and making allegations against people that in some cases turn out to be false. Like, if Deputy Martin has any evidence that any particular individual or any politician or any advisor or any civil servant or anyone associated with Dr. Scally or his team put this information in the public domain by talking to journalists. But I'd ask him to present that evidence. And if he has no evidence, then he shouldn't make the assumption that it must have been a politician or a member of government, because he has no basis for that. And I think it should be just basic decent politics in this House, that we don't make allegations against each other when we've no basis or no evidence for doing so. When it comes to leaks, I often wonder, when a leak happens, who did it? Because you would presume that somebody who did it somehow had a plan or thought to benefit from it in some way. In relation to the aspect of the report that was leaked, in relation to the aspect of the report that was leaked, it was Dr. Scalia's opinion that a commission of inquiry was not necessary. Bear in mind, we'd made a government decision already to establish a commission of inquiry, and the government still has no difficulty whatsoever in establishing a commission of inquiry. So, even the innuendo doesn't make sense on this occasion.
We move